The tray hit the floor before Wren even understood why her hands had opened. Glass broke across the marble in a wide, ringing spray, and every head in the banquet hall turned toward her at once. She stood frozen between two long tables of nobles in silk and gold, holding nothing, her palms still curved as if the tray were there. It was not there. It was in pieces. A hush moved through the hall like a cold draft under a door. Somewhere behind her, a server hissed her name under his breath, a warning to move, to bow, to disappear the way she always did. But Wren could not move. Her whole body had locked in place, because across the hall, the king had stood up from his seat. King Ashgrave Voss did not stand for spilled wine. He did not stand for broken glass. He was the Alpha King of Thornhollow, and men far more important than a serving girl had trembled just from the weight of his stare. Yet here he was, on his feet, one hand pressed flat against the table, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes were fixed on her, not on the glass, not on the mess spreading across the floor in dark red wine, on her. Wren felt her pulse jump into her throat. She had spent her whole life training herself to be forgettable, small, useful, invisible. Servants who were noticed did not last long in this keep. Servants who were noticed by the king lasted even less. She dropped into a bow so fast her knees cracked against the marble. "Forgive me, my king, I will clean it at once." He did not answer. The silence stretched long enough that the nobles at the nearest table began exchanging looks, the kind of looks that meant gossip would be halfway across the kingdom by morning. Still, he said nothing. His nostrils flared, faint but unmistakable, the way a wolf's did when it caught a scent it could not place. Then, in a voice low enough that only she could hear it, he said one word: "Wait." She had never been told to wait by a king before. She had been told to hurry, to vanish, to keep her head down. Wait was new, and it terrified her more than any scolding could have. He crossed the hall in 6 long strides, ignoring the ambassadors he had been speaking with only a moment before, ignoring the murmurs rising around him like smoke. When he reached her, he did not look at the broken glass either. He looked at her hands, then at her face, then, strangely, at the base of her throat, as if searching for something that should have been there and was not. "Your name," he said. "Wren, my king." "Just Wren." "Just Wren," he repeated, and something in his jaw tightened, like a man biting down on a word he refused to say out loud. Every wolf-born citizen of Thornhollow carried 2 things from birth: a family name and a wolf. Names marked bloodlines. Wolves marked strength, rank, and worth. A person without one was strange. A person without both did not exist. Not really, not on paper, and not in the eyes of the court. Wren had neither. She had grown up in the servant quarters at the edge of the keep, raised by kitchen staff who fed her out of pity and never explained why a child had simply appeared among them one winter with no parents, no wolf, and no record of her birth anywhere in the kingdom's registry. The other servants called her the blank when they thought she could not hear. Sometimes they said it when they knew she could. She had built a life around being unseen. She was quick with her hands, quiet with her opinions, quick to laugh at herself before anyone else could laugh first. It was safer that way. A girl with no file in the registry had no protection if someone decided she was a problem worth removing. And now the king of the entire realm was standing over her, breathing like he had run a mile, staring at her as if she were the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "Clean this up," he finally said, straightening. His voice had gone flat and formal again, the voice of a king and not a man who had just forgotten how to breathe. "And then report to the East Wing, ask for Callum Briar." Nobody argued with a direct order from the Alpha King. Wren swallowed her questions, gathered the broken glass with shaking hands, and did not look up again until he had returned to his seat at the head of the hall. She did not see the way his hand curled into a fist beneath the table, fighting the wolf inside him that wanted, more than anything, to cross the room again and stay there. Callum Briar was the king's chief advisor, an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for missing nothing. When Ren found him later that evening in a side chamber near the throne room, he was pacing, and he stopped the moment she entered, staring at her the same way the king had, as if she were something rare that had wandered into a place it did not belong. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Ren did not sit. Servants did not sit in the presence of advisors. He noticed the hesitation and sighed, waving a hand. "Sit, girl. Tonight the rules are different." She sat, carefully, on the edge of the chair, as though the wood might reject her at any moment. "What is your full name?" he asked. "Your true name, not the one the kitchen staff gave you." "I don't have one. I was found. No parents, no papers. The keeper of records told me once there was nothing on file, not even a birth date. They picked one for me." Callum's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened around the edge of his desk until his knuckles paled. "And your wolf," he said. "You have never shifted, never felt it stir, not once, in all your years." It was not a question, it was a fact he already seemed to know, though she could not understand how. "No," she admitted. "I always assumed I simply wasn't born with one. It happens, they told me. Rare, but it happens." "It does not happen," Callum said quietly. "Not the way you think." He rose from his desk and walked to a locked cabinet at the back of the room, retrieving a heavy leather ledger that looked older than the keep itself. He set it down and opened it to a page marked with a wax seal that had been broken long ago and never resealed. 30 years ago, he said, there was a rebellion in this kingdom. A bloodline rose against the crown and lost. Every trace of that bloodline was ordered erased. Names stricken from the registry, records burned. Wolves of that line were bound at birth to keep them hidden, in case any child of that blood survived and tried to reclaim what was taken. Ren felt something cold settle low in her stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" Callum closed the ledger slowly, as if it weighed far more than paper and leather should. "Because the king's beast does not react the way it reacted tonight for strangers, Ren. It reacts that way for blood it recognizes. Blood it was born to protect, or blood it was born to fear." She stood so fast, the chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. "You think I am part of some erased bloodline, a rebel line. That's why I have no wolf, because someone bound it. I think," Callum said carefully, "that we do not yet know what you are. And I think the king intends to find out, whatever the cost." Ren left the chamber with her heart slamming against her ribs, her mind spinning through a childhood of unanswered questions that had suddenly grown teeth. She had always assumed her missing history was simple bad luck, an orphan lost in a large and careless kingdom. She had never once considered that someone might have erased her on purpose. That night, she was told she would no longer serve in the main hall. She was reassigned, without explanation, to the private wing of the castle, the wing reserved for the king himself. She did not sleep at all. The next morning, guards eyed her with open suspicion as she walked the unfamiliar corridors of the private wing, carrying linens she did not know where to deliver. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Callan, stepped directly into her path. "You don't belong here," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "This wing is for the king's personal staff, trusted staff, registered staff." "I was ordered here," Ren said, "by Briar himself." Callan studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside, though his eyes did not soften. "Watch yourself," he muttered as she passed. "Things that don't belong tend to get noticed, and noticed things tend to get removed." She kept walking, refusing to let him see how deeply that landed. She found the king's private study by accident, drawn by the sound of low voices arguing behind a half-open door. She should have turned away. She did not. "Her file does not exist," Callum was saying. "Not one line. Whoever erased her did their work well." "Then we find who did it," came Ashgrave's voice, tight with a control that sounded costly to maintain. "I want every record from 30 years ago pulled, every rebellion casualty, every child unaccounted for. My king, if this girl is who I believe she may be, This is not a small matter. This is a threat to the throne itself." There was a long pause. "I don't care," Ashgrave said finally, quiet and certain. "Find out what she is, and do not let anyone touch her while you do it." Wren stepped back from the door so quickly she nearly dropped the linens in her arms. Her pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out the rest of the conversation. She had come to this castle her entire life as nobody, no name of her own choosing, no wolf, no family, no proof she had ever been born at all, and in a single evening she had become something the most powerful man in the kingdom was willing to defy his own advisors to protect. She did not know yet whether that made her safer, or in far greater danger than she had ever been before. What she did know, standing frozen in that corridor with her arms full of linen and her mind full of questions, was that the life she had built out of being invisible was already gone. There was no vanishing back into the kitchens now, no forgettable version of Wren left to hide behind. Somewhere deep inside her, in a place she had never felt before, something stirred, faint, distant, like a heartbeat that was not quite her own, waking up after a very long sleep. She pressed a hand to her chest and did not move again until it went still. 3 days passed before Wren saw the king again, and in that time the castle around her changed shape without ever changing its walls. Guards who had once ignored her now watched her pass with open curiosity. Maids who had shared her table in the servant kitchens grew quiet whenever she entered a room, their eyes flicking toward her and away again, the way people look at something they have been warned about but not yet told the reason for. Word traveled fast in a castle built on gossip, even when no one knew the truth of what they were gossiping about. She had been given a small room in the private wing, plain, but far better than the shared quarters she had known her whole life. A real bed. A window that opened onto the eastern gardens instead of a wall. It should have felt like a gift. Instead, it felt like a cage with better furniture. Callum Briar visited her twice during those days, each time with more questions and fewer answers. Had she ever felt strange sensations as a child? Had she ever dreamed of running on 4 legs, even if she had never actually done it? Had anyone in her life, however briefly, ever called her by a name other than Wren? She had nothing to give him, only fragments. A cook who once flinched at the sight of her wrist and refused to say why. A caretaker, long dead now, who used to whisper an old lullaby to her in a dialect Wren had never heard spoken anywhere else in the kingdom. "Sing it for me," Callum said, the second time he visited. Wren felt foolish, but she sang it anyway, soft and halting, the words strange in her mouth even after a lifetime of half remembering them. Callum's face drained of color as he listened. He did not explain why. He simply thanked her, gathered his notes, and left without another word. That evening, for the first time since the banquet, the king summoned her directly. She was led to a private terrace overlooking the gardens, where Ashgrave stood alone, with his back to her, hands braced against the stone railing. Even from behind, there was something coiled and restless in the line of his shoulders, a tension that had nothing to do with posture, and everything to do with the creature pacing just beneath his skin. "You wish to see me, my king." He did not turn immediately. When he finally did, his eyes moved over her face, the way a starving man might look at food he was forbidden to touch. "Do you know why I stood up that night?" he asked. "In the hall, over broken glass." "No," Wren admitted. "I've wondered. Everyone has wondered. My wolf recognized something in you before my mind understood what it was seeing. That has never happened to me before. Not once. Not with anyone." "Recognized what, exactly?" His jaw tightened. "I don't fully know yet. That is what unsettles me most." She studied him in the fading evening light, this man the entire kingdom feared and admired in equal measure, and found herself unable to reconcile the stories she had heard about him with the uncertain, almost haunted way he was looking at her now. "Callum thinks I might be connected to some old rebellion," she said carefully. "Some bloodline that was erased. Is that what your wolf recognized? An enemy?" "If it were an enemy," Ashgrave said quietly, "I would have known exactly how to respond. This is not that." "Then what is it?" He did not answer. Instead, he crossed the small distance between them, slow enough that she could have stepped back, could have refused him the closeness. She did not. Some part of her, some instinct she did not understand and had never felt before, kept her rooted in place. When he was close enough that she could see the faint gold ring flickering at the edge of his irises, he lifted a hand, not quite touching her, hovering just above the skin of her wrist. "May I?" No one asks servants for permission. Ren nodded before she could think better of it. His fingers closed gently around her wrist, and the moment they did, a low sound rose in his chest, something between a growl and a groan, entirely involuntary. His eyes flared bright gold, no longer hiding the wolf beneath the man, and for one suspended heartbeat Ren felt something answer inside her own chest. A warmth, a pull, a recognition she had no name for and no explanation to offer. Then, just as quickly, he released her and stepped back, breathing hard, his eyes returning to their normal shade with visible effort. "Forgive me," he said, voice rough. "I did not intend that. What just happened?" "I don't know," he admitted, and for the first time, she heard something almost like fear in his voice. Not fear of her. Fear of what she represented, of a truth he was not yet ready to name. He left the terrace without another word, and Ren stood alone in the gathering dark, with her wrist still tingling where his hand had been, her heartbeat refusing to slow. Over the following week, the investigation around her deepened in ways she could feel even without being told directly. Guards who once ignored the archive wing now stood posted outside it day and night. Servants who cleaned that section were rotated without warning, replaced with unfamiliar faces, loyal only to Callum. Ren caught snippets of conversation she was not meant to hear, names of rebellion leaders from 30 years past, a bloodline called the Ashwolves that had once stood second only to the crown itself, before a failed uprising ended them entirely. She began spending her evenings not in her small room but in the castle's lower kitchens, the one place that still felt like home, sitting with Nora, the elderly cook who had half-raised her. "You look tired," Nora said one evening, sliding a bowl of stew across the worn wooden table. "Everyone is watching me like I'm about to explode," Ren said. "I don't even know what I am. How am I supposed to explain that to anyone else?" Nora was quiet for a long moment, stirring her own bowl without eating. "There was a woman," she finally said, "who worked in these kitchens before you were born. She kept to herself, sharp eyes, sharper tongue. She disappeared the same winter you appeared. I always wondered." "Wondered what?" Nora looked at her with an expression Ren had never seen on the old woman's face before, something between grief and guilt. "Nothing, child. An old woman's foolish thoughts. Eat your stew." Ren wanted to press further, but something in Nora's tone told her the old woman would say no more that night, and pushing would only close the door entirely. 3 nights later, everything shifted again. She was walking back to the private wing after visiting Nora, when she heard raised voices spilling from a side chamber, one she recognized as belonging to Callum. She pressed herself against the wall in the shadow of a support column, listening despite every instinct telling her to walk away. "The Marsh family has heard the rumors," an unfamiliar voice was saying, low and urgent. "If there is truly an Ashwolf heir alive in this castle, they will not sit quietly and let the throne decide what to do about it. The Marsh family has wanted this throne destabilized since the day the crown put down their allies in the rebellion," Callum snapped back. "Of course they've heard the rumors. The question is what they intend to do with them. They intend to remove the problem before it grows into a claim against the crown. You know this as well as I do." Ren's blood ran cold. She was the problem being discussed. She was certain of it, even without her name being spoken aloud. "The king will not allow harm to come to her," Callum said, his voice quieter now, almost weary. "Whatever she is to this kingdom's history, she is something to him now that overrides politics entirely. You've seen it yourself. Then he is a fool, risking his crown over a girl with no name and no wolf." "Careful," Callum warned. Even walls have ears in this castle, and some ears belong to men who report everything they hear straight back to His Majesty. The conversation shifted after that, quieter, more careful, and Wren slipped away before she could be discovered listening. She walked the rest of the way to her room in a daze, her mind spinning through every implication of what she had just heard. Someone wanted her removed, not exiled, removed, in the way people spoke about problems that could not be allowed to exist any longer. She did not sleep that night either. Instead, she sat by her window, staring out at the dark gardens below, turning the pieces of her life over and over, trying to make sense of a picture that kept refusing to complete itself. A missing bloodline, a bound wolf, a caretaker who sang lullabies in a dialect no one else in the kingdom spoke, a cook who wondered about a vanished woman from 30 years past, a king whose beast had recognized her the moment she stepped into a room. Somewhere near dawn, exhausted beyond thought, she finally drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. She dreamed of running, not walking, not stumbling, but running on 4 legs through a forest she had never seen in waking life, wind in fur she did not have, moonlight guiding paws that were not hers and yet felt more familiar than her own hands ever had. She woke gasping, her heart pounding, her skin damp with sweat, despite the cool morning air drifting through her open window. For one impossible, terrifying moment, she could have sworn her hands did not feel entirely like her own. She stared at them in the pale morning light until the feeling passed, until they were simply hands again, ordinary and human, and told herself it had only been a dream. She did not entirely believe it. By mid-morning, she had convinced herself the dream meant nothing. Servants who let themselves believe in old rebellion legends and half-remembered lullabies did not last long in a castle like this one. She dressed, folded the strange feeling away with practiced discipline, and went about her duties as though nothing at all had shifted inside her chest overnight. She was proven wrong before the sun had fully cleared the eastern towers. Callan, the guard who had once warned her away from the private wing, found her in the linen hall and fell into step beside her, his expression unusually grim for a man who normally spoke to her only in warnings. "The king wants you in the lower courtyard," he said. "Now, not later." "Why the lower courtyard?" "That's where they hold the training bouts." "I don't ask why the king wants things," Callan said. "I only deliver the message." She followed him down through corridors she rarely walked, past kitchens and armories, until they reached a wide-open courtyard, ringed with stone benches, usually filled with young wolves sparring under a trainer's watchful eye. This morning it was empty except for Ashgrave, Callum, and 2 unfamiliar men in the deep green livery of a house she did not recognize. Ashgrave's expression, when he saw her, was carefully blank in a way that told her more than any open worry could have. Something was wrong. "This is her," one of the green-liveried men said, not to Wren but past her, as though she were an object under discussion rather than a person standing in front of him. No collar mark, no registry number visible. "Interesting. She is under my protection," Ashgrave said, his voice flat and final. "Whatever business the Marsh House believes it has here, it does not extend to touching my staff." So this was the family Wren had overheard in the corridor 2 nights before. The Marsh House. The ones who wanted the problem removed before it grew into something larger. The taller of the 2 men smiled, unhurried and unbothered by the king's tone. "We simply wish to confirm a rumor, Your Majesty. If it proves false, we will happily withdraw and trouble you no further." "And if it proves true?" Callum asked sharply. The man's smile did not waver. "Then perhaps the crown will finally answer for what was done 30 years ago." Wren stood frozen through the entire exchange, feeling like a stone dropped into still water, watching the ripples of consequence spread outward from her without any control over where they landed. She had spent her whole life trying to be too small to notice. Now she stood at the center of a confrontation between the crown and one of its oldest rivals, and she did not even understand the shape of the danger she was in. "Leave," Ashgrave said finally, each word carved from stone. "Now, before I forget my manners entirely." The marshmen bowed with exaggerated courtesy and withdrew, but not before the taller one turned back once more, his gaze settling on Wren with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "We will be watching, little ghost," he said softly, before turning and disappearing through the courtyard gate. The moment they were gone, Ashgrave crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, his composure cracking at the edges for the first time she had witnessed. "Are you harmed?" "No, I'm fine, just confused, and a little frightened if I'm honest." "You have every right to be," Callum said grimly, joining them. "The Marsh House does not make idle threats. If they suspect what we suspect, they will move quickly to end it before the truth becomes undeniable." "End what, exactly?" Wren demanded, her patience finally fraying after days of half-answers. "Please, someone tell me plainly what I am supposed to be so afraid of." Ashgrave and Callum exchanged a long look, the kind shared between men who had discussed this very question many times without ever agreeing on the answer. "We believe," Ashgrave finally said, "that you may be the last living heir of the Ashwolf bloodline, a family the crown itself helped destroy 30 years ago, during a rebellion that nearly tore this kingdom apart." The words landed like stones in Wren's stomach, heavy and undeniable. "And if I am," she said quietly, "what does that make me to you, to this crown?" Ashgrave's eyes held hers, gold flickering faintly at their edges, refusing to look away even now. "It makes you someone I should have every reason to fear," he said. "And instead, it makes you someone I would burn this entire kingdom down to protect." Neither of them had an answer for the silence that followed. Somewhere above them, a hawk cried out once against the pale morning sky, and Wren stood very still, feeling the weight of a truth she had not chosen and could not yet outrun. The archive room smelled of dust and old paper, a smell Wren had never paid attention to before but would remember for the rest of her life after that afternoon. Callum led her there himself, past 2 guards stationed outside the heavy door, into a narrow chamber lined floor to ceiling with sealed boxes and locked ledgers. He moved with the careful precision of a man who had spent days preparing for this exact moment, setting a single folder on the reading table between them before finally speaking. "I need you to understand," he said, "that what is inside this folder cannot be unlearned. Once you read it, there is no returning to who you were this morning." "I stopped being who I was this morning, 3 days ago," Wren said. "Show me." He opened the folder and slid it toward her. The first page held a name she had never seen written anywhere in her life, not on any document, not in any conversation, not even whispered by the caretaker who used to sing to her in a dialect no one else spoke: Elowyn Ashwolf. Below the name was a birth date. Below the birth date was a single line, stamped in faded red ink across the page. "Bloodline erased by royal decree. Wolf bound at birth, by order of the crown. Location of child unknown, following the fall of House Ashwolf." Wren stared at the page until the letters blurred and reformed, refusing to settle into anything her mind could fully accept. "Elowyn," she whispered, "that was my mother's name." "We believe so," Callum said quietly. House Ashwolf stood second to the crown itself, 30 years past. When the rebellion failed, the crown ordered the bloodline ended entirely. Most of the family did not survive the fighting. A few, we believe, went into hiding. Your mother was rumored to be among them, pregnant, fleeing with allies loyal to her house. And she came here, to this castle, to the very place that destroyed her family. We don't know that for certain. What we do know is that a child appeared in these kitchens the same winter House Ashwolf's last known survivors vanished from record entirely. A child with no wolf, no papers, and no explanation for her existence. Wren's hands had begun to shake, and she pressed them flat against the table to steady herself. Why bind a child's wolf? Why not simply let her be born without one, if the goal was hiding her? "Because," came a new voice from the doorway, "an unbound Ashwolf child would have shifted the very first time she felt strong enough emotion. Fear, grief, joy. There would have been no controlling it, and no hiding what she was. Ashgrave stepped into the chamber, his expression heavier than Wren had ever seen it. He had clearly been listening from the corridor, waiting for the right moment to enter. "Someone bound me on purpose," Wren said slowly, understanding arriving in pieces. "To keep me hidden, to keep me safe, or to keep the crown safe from you," Callum said gently. "We don't yet know which was the true intention, or whose hand performed the binding." Wren looked up sharply. "You think it might have been done by someone in this castle, someone still here?" Neither man answered immediately, and their silence was answer enough. She thought of Nora, the old cook who had wondered aloud about a vanished woman from 30 years past, who had gone quiet and guilty the moment the conversation edged too close to the truth. She thought of the caretaker who had died years ago, who used to sing lullabies in a forgotten dialect and flinch at the sight of Wren's wrist, as though searching for a mark that was never meant to be found by curious eyes. "Nora knows something," Wren said. "She has to." "We will speak with her," Ashgrave said, carefully. "If she was involved in hiding you, she may have done so at great personal risk, and I will not repay that with punishment." Wren closed the folder slowly, her fingers lingering on the faded red stamp across her mother's name. "What happened to her? To Elowyn? Did she survive?" Callum's expression answered before his words did. "The records end the winter you were found, Wren. We have found no trace of her after that point. I am sorry." Grief arrived strangely, not as tears but as a strange hollow stillness, the shape of a loss she had never known she carried, until the moment it was confirmed. She had spent her whole life without a mother's face, a mother's voice, a mother's name to miss. Now she had a name, and somehow the absence felt larger for finally having a shape. Ashgrave moved to stand beside her, not touching her, simply present, a solid and steady weight at her side that asked for nothing and offered everything. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for all of it, for what my crown did to your family, whether or not I sat upon it when the decree was made." "You weren't even born yet, were you?" "No. But the throne remembers what it chooses to remember and forgets what it chooses to forget. I intend to change that, starting with the truth about you." "The Marsh House already suspects," Wren said. "If you make this public, they'll use it as an excuse to destabilize your crown even further." "Let them try," Ashgrave said, and for the first time since the banquet, Wren heard something almost like relief in his voice, the sound of a man finally free to stop pretending the truth did not exist. That evening, Callum arranged a quiet meeting with Nora in the lower kitchens, away from watching eyes. The old cook's hands trembled around her teacup the entire conversation, and more than once she looked as though she might refuse to speak at all. "I was only a young woman then," she finally admitted, her voice thin with old fear. "Elowyn came to the kitchens one night in winter, half-starved, heavy with child, begging for shelter and silence. I gave her both, because I could not do otherwise, and live with myself afterward." "What happened to her?" Wren asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nora's eyes filled with old grief. "She died birthing you, child. There was nothing any of us could do. Before she passed, she made me promise to protect you, to hide what you were from anyone who might use it against you or for you. A wandering healer bound your wolf that same night, at her final request, so that no shift would ever give away your bloodline before you were old enough to understand the danger of it." Wren sat frozen, absorbing 30 years of silence in the space of a single conversation. "Why did you never tell me? All these years, watching me grow up 2 rooms away from you, and you never once said a word." "Because I promised her I would protect you," Nora said, tears finally spilling free. "And in this castle, the truth has always been the most dangerous thing a person can carry. I did what I believed was right. I am sorry if it was not enough." Wren reached across the table and took the old woman's trembling hands in her own, unable to hold on to anger in the face of 30 years of quiet, aching loyalty. "You kept me alive," she said. "You gave me a home when you had every reason to turn me away. Whatever comes next, I will never forget that." Later that night, Alone on the terrace where Ashgrave had first touched her wrist, Wren stared out at the dark gardens and finally let herself feel the full weight of everything she had learned. A mother she would never know, a bloodline erased by the very crown now trying to protect her, a wolf bound before she had ever taken her first breath. She did not hear Ashgrave approach until he was standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "You've been given a great deal to carry today," he said quietly. "I keep waiting to feel angry," Wren admitted. "At the crown, at whoever ordered my family destroyed, at fate itself, for making my whole life a lie I never asked to be part of. Instead, I mostly just feel tired." "Anger will come," Ashgrave said. "Grief moves in its own time, and it does not care what order we expect it to arrive in." "Is that experience speaking, or just wisdom you've read somewhere?" The corner of his mouth lifted, faint but real. "Experience. I lost my own mother young. My father buried his grief in duty and never once let himself feel it fully. I promised myself I would not make that same mistake." Wren studied his profile in the moonlight, this man who carried an entire kingdom's weight on his shoulders and still found room to stand beside a servant girl with no name of her own choosing. "Why does your wolf recognize me the way it does?" she asked. Truly, not the political answer, the real one. Ashgrave turned to face her fully, the gold in his eyes catching what little light the moon offered. "Bloodlines like yours carry a scent signature unlike any other in this kingdom, one my family's line was bound to recognize generations ago, back when House Ashwolf and House Voss stood as allies rather than enemies. My wolf did not see a threat that night in the hall, Wren. It saw something it had been waiting its entire existence to find. And what did it find?" He reached out, slower this time, giving her every opportunity to step away. She did not. His fingers brushed lightly against her jaw, tilting her face up toward his. "It's match," he said quietly. "It's mate. If the old stories hold any truth at all, I did not choose this any more than you did, but I will not pretend I regret it." Wren's breath caught, the words settling over her like something both impossibly large and strangely inevitable, as though some part of her had known it long before either of them said it aloud. "The Marsh house will not let this stand quietly," she said, forcing herself back toward practical fear rather than the dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. "An erased bloodline reclaiming ties to the crown. They'll see it as a threat to everything they've built." "Let them see it as whatever they wish," Ashgrave said. "I have spent my whole life ruling from duty alone. I will not apologize for finally ruling beside someone who makes that duty feel like something worth carrying." Somewhere in the dark gardens below, an owl called out once, and the wind stirred the branches like a held breath finally released. Wren did not know yet what the coming days would demand of her, what dangers waited in the shadow of a crown that had once destroyed her family and now claimed to want to protect her. But standing there in the moonlight, his hand still warm against her jaw, she understood one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer the invisible girl with no name and no file. Whatever came next, she would meet it as Elowin's daughter, and she would not do it alone. 2 days later, the quiet Ashgrave had promised her shattered completely. Wren was summoned before the small council, a gathering of the kingdom's highest nobles, called on short notice under the pretense of routine matters. She learned only after arriving that the true purpose of the meeting was her. Lord Garrick Marsh sat near the head of the long table, dressed in deep green robes trimmed with silver, his posture relaxed in the way of a man who believed he already held the winning hand. Beside him sat Lady Isolde Marsh, his sister, sharp-eyed and silent, watching Wren the way a hawk studies something small moving through tall grass. "Your Majesty," Garrick began, once the formalities had been dispensed with, "rumors have reached my house that a servant girl within these very walls may carry the blood of House Ashwolf, a house this crown declared extinct 30 years ago by royal decree for treason against the throne." "Rumors are not evidence, Lord Marsh," Ashgrave said, his tone even, though Ren could see the tension coiled tight in his shoulders from where she stood near the chamber's edge. "Then let us settle the matter plainly," Garrick said, spreading his hands. "If she is nothing more than an ordinary servant, prove it, and my house will withdraw every objection and apologize for the disturbance. If she is what we suspect, then by the very decree your own crown issued 30 years ago, she represents a legal threat that cannot simply be ignored because your majesty has taken a personal interest in her." Whispers moved through the council chamber like wind through dry grass. Ren felt every eye in the room settle on her, weighing, measuring, deciding what she was worth and what she might cost them. "The decree in question," Callum interjected smoothly, "targeted armed rebellion against the crown, Lord Marsh. It did not, and does not, extend to punishing an infant for the actions of adults she never met and could not have influenced." "A convenient distinction," Isolde Marsh said, speaking for the first time, her voice cool and precise. "One that happens to protect a girl the king clearly has personal reasons to favor." "Careful, Lady Marsh," Ashgrave said, his voice dropping into something colder than Ren had heard from him before. "You are treading close to accusing your king of corrupting the law for personal gain." "I accuse no one of anything, Your Majesty," Isolde said smoothly. "I merely observe that this council deserves clarity, not favoritism, when matters of bloodline and succession are involved." The word succession landed heavily in the chamber, and Ren watched several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats, understanding arriving all at once. This was never truly about the old rebellion. It was about the future. About whether a reclaimed Ashwolf bloodline, standing close to the throne, might one day threaten the balance of power the Marsh House had spent 30 years building in the vacuum left behind. "I have no claim to this throne," Ren said, before she could stop herself, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber, despite her racing heart. "I did not know my own name 3 days ago. I have no interest in succession, no army, no allies, nothing but questions about a family I never had the chance to know." Garrick Marsh turned his attention to her fully for the first time, studying her with open curiosity now rather than dismissal. "And yet the king stood in front of a full banquet hall and defied protocol the moment he laid eyes on you," he said. "Forgive me if I find your claim of harmlessness difficult to fully believe." "Enough," Ashgrave said, rising from his seat, and the entire chamber fell silent at the weight in his voice. "This council was called to discuss border tariffs, not to interrogate a young woman who has done nothing but survive a childhood she did not choose. Lord Marsh, Lady Marsh, if you have formal grievances regarding decree interpretation, submit them through proper channels. Until then, this matter is closed." "For now, perhaps," Garrick said, rising as well, offering a shallow, insincere bow. "Though I suspect, Your Majesty, that matters of blood rarely stay closed for long." The council dispersed shortly after, the tension in the room slow to fade even once the chamber had emptied. Ren remained rooted near the wall long after the last noble had departed, her hands still faintly trembling. Ashgrave crossed to her once they were finally alone, his expression torn between fury at the council and something gentler reserved only for her. "I am sorry you had to endure that," he said. "They're not wrong to be afraid," Ren said quietly. "I don't want their throne, but I understand why they can't simply trust a stranger's word on that." "Trust is earned through actions, not blood," Ashgrave said. "You've done nothing but show more integrity in 3 days than half that council has shown in their entire lives. Give them time." "Time is exactly what the Marsh House seems unwilling to give us," Ren said. "You saw their faces. They've already decided what I am, regardless of what I say." Ashgrave's jaw tightened, the wolf beneath his composure clearly straining against the leash of formal restraint. "Then we will simply have to be prepared for whatever they decide to do next." That preparation came sooner than either of them expected. Later that same night, as Ren made her way back toward her room through the quiet private wing, she noticed a figure lingering near the garden entrance, hood drawn low despite the mild evening air. Instinct, sharper now than it had ever been before, told her something was wrong before her mind fully processed why. She turned to retreat toward the guarded corridor behind her, and the figure moved quickly, closing the distance far faster than any ordinary servant should have been able to manage. A hand closed around her wrist, and this time it did not bring warmth or recognition. It brought only cold, sharp pain, and the unmistakable scent of a stranger's magic pressed against her skin. "Just a moment of your time," the figure said, voice low and unfamiliar. "Lady Marsh sends her regards, and a request that you consider quietly disappearing before this becomes any more complicated than it already is." Wren's heart slammed against her ribs, fear rising fast and sharp. But beneath the fear, something else stirred too, something that had been sleeping her entire life and was only now beginning, faintly, impossibly, to wake. For the first time in 23 years, deep beneath her skin, Wren felt her wolf answer. The pain came first, sharp and unfamiliar, radiating outward from her wrist where the stranger's hand still gripped her. Then came the heat, spreading fast beneath her skin like something long dormant finally catching flame. Wren gasped, stumbling back, and the hooded figure's grip only tightened. "Careful now," the voice warned. "Struggling only makes this more difficult for both of us." "Let go of me," Wren said, and her own voice sounded strange to her ears, lower, rougher, threaded through with something that had never been there before. The stranger laughed softly, unimpressed. "You have no wolf, girl, no claws, no strength beyond what any ordinary servant carries. Lady Marsh was very clear that you would come quietly." He was wrong, and he did not know it yet. The heat beneath Wren's skin built past anything she could contain, a pressure like a held breath finally forced out, and with a sound that was half gasp and half growl, something inside her simply broke free. She did not fully understand what happened next, not in any way she could later explain clearly. One moment she was a frightened woman held captive in the dark. The next, her vision had sharpened impossibly, colors bleeding into shades she had never perceived before, and the stranger's grip on her wrist suddenly meant nothing at all, because the hand that broke it free was no longer entirely a hand. The stranger stumbled back with a shout of alarm, and Wren caught one confused, disorienting glimpse of herself in the dark, reflective glass of the garden doors. Where a frightened servant girl had stood only moments before, something else looked back now, eyes glowing faint gold, form caught halfway between the woman she had always been and a wolf she had never known she carried. The stranger did not wait to see what she might become fully. He turned and fled into the dark gardens, and Wren collapsed to her knees, gasping, the strange new sensation of her own body already receding as quickly as it had arrived, leaving her shaking and human once more on the cold garden stones. Guards found her minutes later, alerted by the commotion, and within moments Ashgrave himself was there, kneeling beside her, his hands hovering as though afraid to touch her and somehow make whatever had happened worse. "Wren, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I don't know what just happened," she managed, her voice raw. "Someone grabbed me. Lady Marsh's man, I think. And then I wasn't just me anymore. I was something else. Just for a moment." Ashgrave's eyes widened, understanding arriving fast. "Your wolf. It broke through. It hurt," Wren admitted, still trembling. "And then it didn't. And then it was gone again before I even understood what I was looking at." He gathered her carefully into his arms, and this time she did not resist the comfort of it, pressing her face against his shoulder as the last of the adrenaline drained from her body, leaving her hollow and shaking in its wake. "The binding is breaking," Callum said grimly, arriving moments later with a contingent of guards already fanning out to search the gardens. Strong emotion, danger, fear, it must have been enough to crack 30 years of suppression, even if only briefly. "Find whoever did this," Ashgrave said, his voice a low growl of barely restrained fury. "I want them found before morning." The attacker was not found that night, nor the next. What was found, 3 days later, was a formal letter delivered to the Crown under the Marsh House seal, its language carefully worded, deniable, but unmistakable in its threat. "We understand tensions have risen regarding recent rumors. We suggest, in the interest of the kingdom's stability, that certain individuals of uncertain origin be relocated somewhere quieter, for their own protection as well as the crown's. Ashgrave read the letter twice in the privacy of his study, then set it down with controlled precision that somehow felt more dangerous than if he had simply torn it apart. "They are threatening you directly now," he said to Wren, who sat across from him, still pale from the days of sleeplessness that had followed the attack, no longer hiding behind rumor and suggestion. "What do we do?" "We stop hiding as well," Ashgrave said. "Every day we treat this as a secret to be managed quietly is another day the Marsh House believes it holds the advantage. It is time the full truth stood in daylight, where their threats lose their power." "You mean tell the kingdom, publicly, that an erased bloodline has returned?" "I mean claim you," Ashgrave said, his eyes steady on hers despite the enormity of what he was suggesting. "Publicly, formally, as more than a rumor to be managed, as my intended, and as an heir this crown wronged and now intends to make right." Wren's breath caught. "That will destabilize everything. Every noble house that benefited from the Ashwolf line's destruction will see it as a direct threat. Then let them see it clearly, rather than through the distorted lens of rumor and fear," Ashgrave said. "I would rather face open opposition than allow the woman I love to be threatened in shadows and letters no one dares sign honestly." The word love landed between them, quiet and enormous, and for a moment neither of them moved to acknowledge it directly. "You've known me 8 days," Wren finally said, her voice unsteady. "I have known you my entire life," Ashgrave said. "I simply did not meet you until 8 days ago. My wolf has waited for you far longer than either of us has been alive to understand, Wren. I will not pretend otherwise, simply because the timeline makes the world uncomfortable." She crossed the small distance between them and let herself finally, fully lean into the solid warmth of him, no longer holding back the parts of herself that wanted this, wanted him, wanted whatever strange and dangerous future waited on the other side of a truth about to become undeniable. "If we do this," she said against his chest, "there is no undoing it afterward." "I am not asking for something undoable," Ashgrave said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I am asking for something permanent." The announcement was made 3 days later, before the full assembled court, in the same banquet hall where broken glass had first announced Wren's presence into a life she had never expected to claim. Ashgrave stood before his nobles, Wren at his side, and spoke plainly of an old wrong the crown had committed, of a bloodline destroyed unjustly in the chaos following a rebellion long past, of a woman who carried that bloodline's last surviving blood and who would, from this day forward, stand recognized rather than hidden. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some nobles rose in support, moved by the plain honesty of a king willing to correct his own crown's history. Others sat in stony, calculating silence, their eyes already turning toward the Marsh House seats, waiting to see how the old rivals would respond to a threat now spoken aloud, rather than whispered in shadows. Garrick Marsh rose slowly from his seat, his expression carefully composed, despite the fury Wren could see simmering just beneath the surface. "A bold declaration, Your Majesty," he said. "One I suspect will not sit quietly with every house in this kingdom." "I did not expect it to," Ashgrave said evenly. "Truth rarely settles quietly when it has been buried for 30 years, Lord Marsh. I would rather face the disruption of honesty than continue protecting the comfort of old lies." Garrick's jaw tightened, and for a moment Wren saw something dangerous flash behind his composed exterior, a promise of resistance yet to come. "Then I suppose," he said, "we shall see how much support truth actually commands, once put to the test." He bowed shallowly and departed the hall, his sister following close behind, and Wren felt the weight of what they had just done settle heavily over the room, even as scattered applause rose around them. The war that followed was not fought with swords, at least not at first. It was fought with alliances quietly courted, old debts called in, rumors spread through corridors and taverns alike, each side maneuvering to claim the loyalty of houses, still deciding where their true interests lay. Ren spent those tense weeks learning, faster than she had ever learned anything, the language of court politics she had spent her whole life safely ignorant of as an invisible servant. Callum tutored her patiently each evening, walking her through alliances, grievances, and old debts that stretched back generations before her birth. "You are a quick study," he told her, more than once, genuine surprise coloring his voice each time. "I spent my whole life reading rooms to survive them," Ren said. "This isn't so different, just higher stakes and better clothing." Slowly, carefully, her wolf continued to surface, no longer only in moments of fear, but occasionally in moments of calm as well, as though the creature inside her was learning, alongside the woman housing it, how to exist without the suppression that had defined her entire life until now. Ashgrave took it upon himself to guide her through those early disorienting shifts, patient in a way she suspected few outside their private moments ever saw from him. "It will not always feel like losing control," he promised her, after one particularly difficult evening left her shaking and exhausted on the floor of his private study. "The fear fades. What remains is simply another part of yourself, finally free to exist." "I hope you're right," Ren said, leaning into his steady presence, "because right now, it mostly just feels like drowning." "Then hold on to me," Ashgrave said simply, "until you remember how to swim." The Marsh house, meanwhile, was not idle. Word reached the castle that Garrick had begun quietly gathering support among the kingdom's border lords, framing Ren's claim not as justice restored, but as a dangerous precedent, one that might see any number of old rebellion bloodlines emerge from hiding to challenge the stability the crown had spent 30 years rebuilding. "He is not entirely wrong to worry," Callum admitted privately to Ashgrave and Ren, late one evening as the three of them reviewed reports gathered from loyal contacts across the kingdom. "Whatever the moral truth of it, your claim does set a precedent other erased families may attempt to exploit. Then we will handle those cases as they arise, honestly, rather than continuing to bury truth simply because it is inconvenient," Ashgrave said. "I would rather rule a kingdom built on honest reckoning than one propped up by comfortable silence." Ren, listening quietly beside him, found herself believing, for the first time since the night the truth had first shattered her carefully invisible life, that whatever came next, she would not face it as a frightened girl with no name. She would face it as Elowin's daughter, wolf finally awake beneath her skin, standing beside a king who had chosen truth over comfort, and love over the safety of silence. The Marsh house, she suspected, was only just beginning to understand what that truly meant. The attack came at dawn, when the castle was least prepared for it. Ren woke to shouting in the corridors outside her room, distant at first, then closer, then unmistakably urgent. She was on her feet and reaching for a robe before she fully understood why her body had moved faster than her thoughts. Some instinct honed over weeks of danger, already answering an alarm her mind had not yet processed. Callan burst through her door without knocking, sword already drawn, his expression grim in a way that told her everything she needed to know before he spoke a single word. "Marsh forces," he said. "They've breached the eastern gate. Not an army, not officially. They'll call it a band of rogue mercenaries if questioned, but make no mistake, this is Garrick Marsh's doing." "Where is Ashgrave?" "Already moving toward the breach with his personal guard. He wants you in the lower vault, somewhere secure, until this is contained." Ren's stomach twisted. "He's fighting them himself?" "He's the Alpha King, Ren. He doesn't send others to face danger he won't face himself." She followed Callan through the castle's shifting chaos, past servants fleeing toward safe rooms and guards rushing the opposite direction toward the fighting, the whole structure alive with the particular panic of a place under sudden siege. Somewhere ahead, she could hear the unmistakable sounds of a battle already underway, shouts and the clash of steel, and beneath it all, a low, resonant howl that could only belong to Ashgrave's wolf, fully shifted and fighting. "I can't hide while he's out there," Ren said, stopping abruptly in the corridor. Those are his orders. He's not my king in this moment, Callan. He's the man I love, facing danger without me. I won't hide from that. Callan hesitated, clearly torn between duty and the fierce certainty burning in her expression, before finally exhaling sharply. Stay behind me then. If your wolf decides to surface, let it. We may need every advantage we can get. They found the fighting concentrated near the eastern courtyard, where a contingent of marsh mercenaries, perhaps 30 strong, clashed against the castle's guard beneath the pale light of early morning. Ashgrave fought at the center of it, fully shifted, a massive silver wolf moving with lethal, controlled fury against 3 attackers at once, his advisors and guards forming a protective ring around the courtyard's edges to prevent the fighting from spreading further into the castle proper. Garrick Marsh stood at the courtyard's far end, not fighting himself but directing, his expression cold and calculating even as the battle raged around him. "You didn't have to bring this to bloodshed," Wren called out, stepping into view despite Callan's sharp hiss of protest beside her. Garrick's eyes found her immediately, something like satisfaction flickering across his features. "There she is, the reason for all this trouble." "This was never necessary," Wren said, forcing steadiness into her voice despite the chaos surrounding them. "I never wanted your throne, Lord Marsh. I told you that myself." "Perhaps you don't want it," Garrick said, "but your existence alone destabilizes 30 years of careful balance. Sometimes, girl, the threat isn't intention. It's simply existing where you were never meant to survive." He gestured sharply, and 2 of his mercenaries broke away from the main fighting, moving directly toward Wren with clear purpose. Callan moved to intercept, but there were 2 of them and only 1 of him, and Wren felt fear rise fast and sharp in her chest, old and familiar, and this time entirely justified. The fear did not paralyze her the way it once might have. Instead, it lit something loose beneath her skin, and this time, unlike the frightened, uncontrolled break of weeks before, Wren felt herself reach for the shift rather than simply endure it happening to her. The change came faster than she expected, less painful than the first time, almost natural in a way that startled her even as it happened. One moment she stood human and afraid in the courtyard. The next, she met the first mercenary's attack on 4 paws, teeth bared, a creature finally fully awake and entirely her own. The fight that followed was brief and decisive. Whatever the mercenaries had expected from a servant girl with no registered wolf, it was not this, and their hesitation cost them the advantage entirely. Wren fought with an instinct she did not fully understand, but trusted completely, driven not by fury, but by something steadier, the fierce, uncomplicated need to protect what she had only just begun to claim as hers. Ashgrave, catching sight of her fully shifted for the first time in the middle of battle, let out a sound that was pure wolf and pure relief all at once, redoubling his own efforts with renewed ferocity now that he understood she could hold her own beside him rather than needing protection from a distance. Garrick Marsh watched the tide of the courtyard fight turn decisively against his hired mercenaries, his composed expression finally cracking into something closer to genuine alarm. "This changes nothing," he called out, backing toward the courtyard gate as his remaining forces began to falter. "The kingdom will not simply accept an erased bloodline reclaiming power through violence." "We didn't bring the violence here, Lord Marsh," Ashgrave said, shifting back to human form, breathing hard but steady, blood not his own, streaking across his bare shoulder. "You did. And every noble house watching this courtyard will remember exactly whose forces struck first." Garrick's escape was cut short moments later, when a second contingent of royal guards, summoned the moment the breach was reported, closed off the eastern gate entirely. He was taken into custody, along with what remained of his hired forces, his composed mask finally slipping into open, undisguised fury as guards led him away. "This is not finished," he shouted back toward them, as he was marched from the courtyard. "You've made an enemy of every house that values stability over sentiment. Then those houses may bring their grievances to my council chamber," Ashgrave called back, "rather than hired blades to my courtyard." The courtyard fell quiet in the aftermath, littered with the debris of battle, and Ren felt herself shift back to human form, exhaustion crashing over her in a wave now that the danger had passed. Ashgrave crossed to her immediately, careless of his own injuries, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that spoke louder than any words could have. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured against her hair, though there was no real reprimand in it, only relief. "You shouldn't have expected me to hide," Ren answered, pressing her face against his chest, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of everything that had just happened. Not anymore. The days that followed brought a different kind of battle, fought in council chambers rather than courtyards, as the full political fallout of the attack rippled through the kingdom. With clear evidence of Garrick Marsh's hired forces breaching the castle itself, much of the wavering support he had cultivated collapsed almost overnight. Houses that had hesitated to back Ashgrave's public claim now found it considerably easier to stand behind a crown that had been directly attacked, rather than one merely defending an unpopular truth. Garrick Marsh himself was stripped of his formal titles and lands, tried before the full council for treason against the crown, a bitter echo of the very fate his family had once helped enact against House Ashwolf 30 years before. Isolde Marsh, lacking direct involvement in the attack itself, retained her position, though considerably diminished in influence, and forced to publicly distance herself from her brother's actions. Ren attended every session of the trial, standing quietly at Ashgrave's side, watching a chapter of old cruelty finally close in something resembling justice, rather than further silence. "Does it feel like enough?" Ashgrave asked her, the evening after the verdict was finally delivered. Watching him answer for what he attempted, Ren considered the question carefully, sitting beside him on the same terrace where he had first touched her wrist and changed the entire shape of her life. "It feels like a beginning," she said, "not an ending. My mother is still gone. 30 years of silence can't be undone by a single trial, but it feels like the truth finally has room to breathe, instead of being buried the way it was before. That is all any of us can ask for," Ashgrave said, drawing her closer against his side. "Room for truth to breathe, and the courage to keep tending it once it does." The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks later, in the same banquet hall where Ren had once dropped a tray of glasses and unknowingly changed the course of her entire life. This time, she did not enter through the servant's door, carrying trays she would never be thanked for delivering. She entered through the grand entrance, dressed not in servant's gray but in deep, rich colors befitting the bloodline she now claimed openly, Ashgrave waiting for her at the head of the hall with an expression that held none of the careful restraint he had once shown the entire assembled court. The ceremony itself was simple, by royal standards, a formal recognition of her bloodline restored to the kingdom's registry, followed immediately by her binding to Ashgrave as his mate and equal, witnessed by a court finally willing, or at least finally required, to accept the truth standing before them. Nora sat near the front of the hall, tears openly streaming down her weathered face, the woman who had kept a dying mother's final promise for over 2 decades, finally watching that promise reach its true completion. Callum stood nearby as well, his expression carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who had spent weeks piecing together a truth that had finally found its proper resting place. When the final words of the ceremony were spoken, and the registrar approached with the kingdom's official ledger, Ren felt her breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with a lifetime of waiting for this exact moment. The registrar dipped his pen, and beneath the space long left blank in the kingdom's official records, beneath a family line marked erased for 30 years, by decree of a crown finally choosing to make amends, he wrote her name. Ren Ashwolf Voss, heir restored, wolf recognized, mate to the Alpha King, chosen not by decree but by the simple, undeniable truth his beast had known from the very first moment their paths crossed in a hall full of broken glass. She stood at Ashgrave's side as the assembled court finally offered its formal recognition, applause rising through the hall in a wave that felt, for the first time, entirely genuine rather than simply obligatory. She thought of the frightened, invisible girl who had once trained herself to disappear into corners, who had spent her whole life believing that being unseen was the safest way to survive. That girl was gone now, not erased the way her mother's bloodline had once been, but transformed, claimed, finally standing exactly where she belonged. Later that night, alone with Ashgrave on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the weight of the crown and ceremony finally set aside, Wren allowed herself simply to breathe. No more hiding, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. No more hiding, Ashgrave agreed, pulling her close against the cool night air. Only the truth, standing exactly as it was always meant to. Somewhere below them, the gardens rustled softly in the wind, and for the first time in her entire life, Wren felt no fear in the sound at all. Only the quiet, steady certainty of a home, finally, fully claimed.